place you do not know. I would like to announce the beginning of this presentation. I am not sure which number this is, but this is a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce Professor Israel Finkelstein, who is one of the leading archaeologists of the biblical period in Israel for many years now. And he's one of the best speakers I've ever heard. He's one of the most wonderful and convincing teachers of archaeology. So I'm sure that you will enjoy this presentation very, very much. At the same time, I want to say a word of warning, because sometimes Professor Finkelstein does not agree with the biblical text. Sometimes Professor Finkelstein does not agree with other professors. And so here you are to listen to him, learn from his enormous knowledge, and judge for yourself. So Professor Finkelstein, Israel, all yours.
Okay. I hope that you can all hear me.
Very good.
Listening to you.
I suppose that this is the moment to mute all the microphones, so I can speak until the end of the lecture, and I'm sure that there is a system of asking questions that can be transmitted to me after.
Yes, people will ask questions in the chat, and then Julia or I will tell you what they are, mostly Julia.
Great. So I will try to speak for about 50 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. Let me start by saying that I have a special place for Sarel in my heart somewhere, for the simple reason that my parents-in-law used to come with Sarel to Israel from France many years ago, before me and my wife got married, and even after. So I know the organization, and I am really happy to be able to give this presentation and help a little bit in these difficult times. So today I'll be speaking about the Northern Kingdom of Israel, the view from Megiddo. Let me start by saying, first of all, that Megiddo is a very important site, a key site for understanding the archaeology of Israel in general, in the Bronze Age, in the Iron Age, and the archaeology, material culture, and hence history of the Northern Kingdom of Israel. Just to give you some sort of a reminder, those of you who are not familiar with the details of the biblical story. According to the Bible, when King David became king of Jerusalem, there was a period of time that he ruled over the entire territory of the land of Israel, him and his son Solomon. And according to the book of Kings, after the days of King Solomon, this united monarchy broke down into two separate kingdoms. The Northern Kingdom, that is to say Israel in the north, the capital was after a while Samaria, in the Samaria highlands, north of Jerusalem, and Judah in the south, the Southern Kingdom, with the capital in Jerusalem. And they lived side by side. They existed side by side for about 2 centuries or so, let's say between 930 and 730 BC, 730. And then at the end, the Northern Kingdom of Israel was taken over by Assyria, the great empire, and Judah managed to survive for an additional period of time, about 125 years. So we will be speaking about the Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom has a very bad public relation in the Bible, because the text of the book of Kings was put in writing by authors in Jerusalem after Israel was no more, and Israel was considered to be some sort of a rival. The book of Kings, the ideology, the theology of the book of Kings is as follows. The authors say, well, the kingdom was illegitimate, the kings were illegitimate, but you guys are okay as long as you follow 2 conditions. The first of all, you acknowledge the rule of the legitimacy of the rule of the Davidic kings from Jerusalem over the entire population of Israel and Judah combined, and you acknowledge the centrality of that worship can be practiced only in one place, in the temple in Jerusalem. In any event, the Northern Kingdom is a little bit diminished in the Book of Kings, while archaeologically speaking, from what we know from archaeology and what we know also from the texts of the ancient Near East, I would call these texts extra biblical texts. We know from these texts and from archaeology that the Northern Kingdom was the stronger one as long as they existed side by side. It was bigger territorially, it was more populated in a balance of about 1-3 or 1-4, and it prospered economically, and it was better connected to the regions around it. So from any perspective that one is looking at the history of this country, in the Iron Age, in biblical times, the Northern Kingdom was the more prominent one. Having said this, let's now dive into the site of Megiddo. Here's a nice picture of one part of the mound with the Jezreel Valley in the background. And in this picture, you can see, first of all, the site. The site is a very dominating one. It sits overlooking the Jezreel Valley, the breadbasket, if you wish, of the land of Israel, on plenty of water. There are two good springs on both sides of the site, and it sits also on some of the most important roads of antiquity, especially the international road that connected Egypt in the south via the land of Israel to Mesopotamia and Anatolia in the north. And Megiddo guards this very important road in a very sensitive place where it goes down from the hills into the Jezreel Valley. So this is the picture looking to the east, showing you the site of Megiddo here in the foreground of the picture. And on the left-hand side, a map of northern Israel. You can see the Sea of Galilee, the Mediterranean Sea. The modern city of Haifa is located over here. This one over here is the Jezreel Valley, and Megiddo is located on the western margin of the Jezreel Valley. Now the site, because of its importance, by the way, it is the only, I repeat, the only site in the land of Israel which is mentioned in all great archives of antiquity in biblical times. Egyptian, Assyrian, Hittite, that is to say Anatolia, and of course in the Bible, in many places in the Bible, in several books of the Bible. So because of this importance of Megiddo, the strategic location mentioned in all texts, and in very important junctions in the history of the land of Israel, so to speak, it was excavated. It has, in fact, been excavated for over 1 century. Excavations there started in the beginning of the 20th century by a German expedition. You can see on the left-hand side top. And then there was this celebrated excavation by the University of Chicago in the 1920s and 1930s. This was probably the largest excavation of a biblical site, in fact, ever taken in this country, including modern times, including our own days. Then later in the 60s, the very well-known Israeli archaeologist and ex-chief of staff, Yigael Yadin, whom you can see here on the right-hand side top, on the right side of the picture, carried out excavations at Megiddo, limited excavations, I would say, in order to clarify several historical problems related to biblical times, to the Iron Age. And then my own excavation there, we started in 1994 in a way, and we are working in the field. And now we have been there for 26 years, but we are working every second year. And you can see the team. The team is international team, Israelis, Americans, Europeans, and we are trying to be well connected to the universities in Israel and abroad. Now, during the excavations at Megiddo, during the many years of excavations of the 4 missions, many monuments dating to the Iron Age have been unearthed, and you can see some of them over here. those of you, I suppose that some of you visited the site. On the left-hand side, you can see the famous water system. On the right-hand side, bottom, the Megiddo stables. On the right-hand side, top, the Megiddo gates. I will be speaking about them. In fact, Megiddo has the number of, let's put it this way, the number of monuments from biblical times at Megiddo exceeds every other site in Israel, including Jerusalem. So when we try to promote the site as a World Heritage Site, and it has been declared as a World Heritage Site, we suggested to UNESCO that many people come to Israel with the Bible in their hand, but there are not very many places where you can really touch so many monuments from biblical times as at Megiddo. And this is something that needs to be remembered when we speak about this site. Now, this is a picture, a nice air picture of the site, showing the story of my own expedition. As I mentioned to you before, we have been working there for 26 years now. And you can see in yellow the areas where we exposed the Bronze Age finds. In fact, there are several more, but mainly take a look at the blue. The blue are those locations at the site where we managed to unearth monuments and layers from the Iron Age, that is to say, from biblical times, from the period related to the Northern Kingdom of Israel, which means to the late 10th century, the 9th century, and the 8th century, until the takeover of the Northern Kingdom by Assyria in between 732 and 720 BC. I wish to speak today. There's no way that I can cover the entire history of Megiddo in the Iron Age, so I will shed light on several points which I think are interesting for the discussion of Megiddo in the Iron Age and the discussion of the Northern Kingdom. Let me start with just a few words about the end of the Bronze Age, because the end of the Bronze Age was the moment that, in fact, the scene had been opened, so to speak, for the rise of rule of the people of Israel over the Jezreel Valley and over this side. So at Megiddo, the end of the Bronze Age is relatively late, around 1100 BC. I'm saying this because we know today from excavations in different parts of the country that the destruction of the Canaanite cities in the Levant, in the region, in the land of Israel, in Canaan, was a long process that took about a century, or in fact a century and a half, starting in the middle of the 13th century BC in places such as Hatzor in the northern part of the country, and continuing until the later events such as Megiddo around 1100 BC. Here's a picture of a beautiful monument that had been exposed by the University of Chicago many years ago, and the finds are really exceptional. On the left-hand side, you can see one of the famous Megiddo ivories, those ornaments which adorned furniture of the king of Megiddo in the late Bronze Age, which means in the 13th century, beginning of the 12th century BCE. And this beautiful palace came to an end in a big fire, a big destruction. And today, because we are working with modern dating techniques, and we especially are trying to establish the chronology of Megiddo on the firm grounds of radiocarbon dating, we know that Megiddo too went through some sort of a gradual process of decline, and the final blow to the site came around 1100 BC. So, for instance, to give you an example, here you can see on the left-hand side the destruction layer with these this debris, black and yellow, representing big fire that destroyed the city. You can see it also over here. And the University of Chicago discovered in the ruins of Megiddo of that time this object. This is a base of a statue of the pharaoh Ramesses VI. And as you probably know, we have good dates for the Egyptian pharaohs. I'm not going now to elaborate exactly how, but we know their dates. And for the Egyptian pharaohs of the 20th dynasty, he belonged to the 20th dynasty. If there are disputes between scholars, the disputes are over 5-10 years here and there. So basically, we know where we are. We are in the 30s of the 12th century BC, which means about 1130 BC. And this was one blow to the site, and the site managed to recover, and then came the final blow about 30 years later. Now the question, this is of course is the background, it's not about the Northern Kingdom. So the question is basically, how did Megiddo become Israelite, which means under rule of the people of the highlands, basically, and when exactly, how and when did it happen exactly? And here I wish to show you a few pictures, and wish to speak about a period of about a century between the middle of the 11th century, 1050 BC, to the middle of the 10th century, 950 BC, a period which I describe as New Canaan. I mean, I thought about, when I gave this title to the period, I was thinking about, some sort of a small town in Ohio somewhere, probably called, New Canaan. I'm sure there are places like this in the US. In any event, let's say a few words about this. So the New Canaan phenomenon, what is the phenomenon? First of all, there was a big debate among scholars regarding identifying how to label, how to classify the groups who ruled at Megiddo after the destruction at the end of the Bronze Age. Were they Israelites immediately right away in the beginning? Or maybe there was some sort of a revival of Canaanite life? Even there were other scholars at that time who spoke about Philistines. And I think that we can say today quite confidently that we are dealing here with groups that can be described as Canaanite. And thereby I call it a new Canaan or renewed Canaan, because after the destruction, apparently after a while, after some sort of an occupational gap at the site, people came back and the settlement, and renewed the settlement site, and the small settlement in the beginning grew gradually to become quite a prosperous city in the beginning of the 10th century. And here you see the architecture of the site. And what I wish to tell you here is that when one looks very carefully at the material culture of Megiddo at that, in this period, one can see that we are dealing with features of material culture which are very similar to what we knew before, to the material culture of the site in the Bronze Age, in Canaanite times, so to speak. And this is the reason for me to call it New Canaan. So we can see this in the architecture in front of you now, and we can see this in every aspect of material culture. For instance, I'm showing you now a picture of an assemblage, a group of pottery vessels from Megiddo. They were found in this place over here among, in these rooms that you can see in front of you. And they, are very similar to those which we know from, let's say, the 12th century, to the extent that I suppose that, just looking at the picture, it would be not so easy even for me to tell you, in a split of a second, whether we are in the late Bronze Age or in the beginning of the Iron Age. With the transition, by the way, from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, traditionally understood as taking place in the late 12th century with the pullout of Egypt from Canaan. Now I'm shifting from architecture and pottery to other features of material culture. For instance, on the left-hand side, flint industry. On the right-hand side, jewelry. On top, we can see evidence for metallurgical activity. And in all of them, we can really see continuity from the end of the Bronze Age into the beginning of the Iron Age, as if the material culture is the same. So there is good reason to believe, and we see this, by the way, also in the religious architecture. Here we see the major big temple of Megiddo, which prospered in the 13th century, 12th century, and then was revived later. And even in the small finds related to cult, such as the figurine or statuette that you see on the left-hand side, this is really continuation of the culture of the second millennium BC. So the buzzword here is continuity, I suppose. And no less important, there is clear evidence that this is also the situation regarding the settlement pattern, or let's put it this way, the territorial disposition in the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. Because what you see here are the main cities in the around 1000 BC, and they are located exactly in the same places for which we have information, even records from the Egyptian administration, those places which were important before, which had been important before in the Bronze Age. So also from the point of view of territorial disposition. All this came to an end in a huge devastation, and this destruction, this devastation was even stronger than the one before, which I showed you at the end of the Bronze Age, which means the entire site was completely annihilated. And there was another occupational gap, a short one, but another gap at the site. Just take a look at this picture and see the accumulation of about 1 meter of collapse of debris because of the big fire at the end of this period of renewed Canaanite activity at Megiddo. Now the question, of course, who did it? How to understand this? And there have been many ideas about this, from the very beginning, the more conservative way of looking at things. There were scholars who suggested that this Megiddo was conquered, taken over by King David when he expanded from Jerusalem to create this big united monarchy. Then later there were ideas that this was the result of the campaign of a pharaoh mentioned in the Bible, by the way, in the 10th century, late 10th century, Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt. However, when we look at the situation in the valley and we take a very close look at the radiocarbon dates that come from the destructions, they are also not at the same time, which means we again are dealing with a gradual process rather than one big destruction as a result of a military campaign. And because of this, the only way that I can understand this is to argue that the Jezreel Valley was taken over gradually by people who lived in the heartland of the highlands, which means the heartland of ancient Israel. They can be called Israelites or Proto-Israelites. First of all, there is a record, Egyptian record, which mentions a group of people named Israel as early as 1200 BC. And secondly, they live in villages in the highlands that become part of the northern kingdom in the centuries to come. So there is safe ground to describe them as Israelites. And they gradually expand from the highlands into the valley. They take over these cities, they destroy them. And in fact, what we see to justify this description is that the next phase can already be described because of the material culture, also because of the records, the historical records, as a part of the monarchy, of the Israelite Northern Kingdom monarchy. Now, the question that I put here on the left-hand side below, is this echoed in any way in the Bible? I mean, not the period of the kings, but before the takeover of the valley by the highlanders, by the people who come from the highlands and can be described as Israelites. Is there an echo for this? Possibly. In some of the very vague memories that come from described in the book of Samuel, and come from the time of the first North Israelite king described in the Bible, King Saul. I'm just mentioning this without going into details because I wish to move forward. Now, starting around middle of the 10th century, after a short occupational gap, hiatus, starting in the late 10th century, we can already describe the people who rule at Megiddo as Israelites. And Megiddo is part of the Kingdom of Israel, and it is an important place because of its strategic location. It is one of the major administrative centers of the kingdom. Please remember that the capital of the kingdom was in the highlands. First in several sites around Shechem, and then later with the Omri Dynasty. I will be speaking about them in a minute. Later, as I mentioned before, I think, at Samaria. But Samaria was in the highlands, and the northern kingdom needed some centers, administrative, in the lowlands to exert the domination of the dynasty on the people of the countryside, and Megiddo was one of them. It was one of the most important administrative centers of the kingdom. So I will be speaking now about the first period of big prosperity of the northern kingdom and how it is depicted in the finds at Megiddo. And I wish to speak about the Omri Dynasty. This is a dynasty, you know, just to remind those of you who are not very familiar with the details of the Book of Kings, the two books of Kings, in Jerusalem, according to the Bible, ruled one dynasty from the very beginning, King David, until the last king, Zedekiah, who was deported to Babylonia after the takeover of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in the beginning of the 6th century, which means 350, for almost 400 years later, after King David, the same dynasty. In the north, it was not the same. The situation was very different for many reasons. And there were different dynasties. And there was two dynasties which were especially strong and important. The first one is the Omri Dynasty, called the Omri Dynasty because the first king was King Omri of the north, and the second king has a better name. You probably heard the name and you know it also from American literature, if you wish. The second king is King Ahab. So Ahab is the famous and the strongest king of the north in the beginning of the 9th century. Now, as you know, Megiddo is also mentioned as a place which was built by King Solomon. There is a verse in the book of Kings, in the first book of Kings, in chapter 9, speaking about King Solomon building Hazor, a place in the Galilee, and Megiddo and Gezer. Gezer is a place in the coastal plain, today not so far from the main highway leading from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And in the beginning of research, this verse was taken literally to say that we are dealing with three places which were constructed by King Solomon. And starting in the middle of the 90s, which means about 25 years ago, a question mark was put on this description for many reasons. One of them, the simple question that we all acknowledge that the Book of Kings was put in writing relatively late, maybe in the late, not earlier than the late 7th century BC. On this, I think we all agree. So the question was whether there were records kept in Jerusalem to describe the periods before. And on this, there has been a big dispute. In any event, in my opinion at least, there was no possibility of composition of complex literary text in the two Hebrew kingdoms, Israel and Judah, before around 800 BC. And this, in a way, reflects also on the question of Megiddo. So at Megiddo, let's put it this way, in a short way, at Megiddo, there were two monuments which were considered to be the symbols of the power of King Solomon and the construction of King Solomon, and thereby, because of the problematic situation in Jerusalem, it's very difficult to locate the layers, to reach the layers of the 10th century BC, because Jerusalem was so much overbuilt in later generations, later centuries, until, in fact, today. So Megiddo was, the symbol, these monuments of Solomonic power. The two palaces that were excavated, one of them on the left-hand side by the University of Chicago in the 1920s, 25, 26, and one of them on the right-hand side by Iga Eliadim of the Hebrew University, and later by us. And then there were also the famous gates. I will be speaking about it, giving you a few words. So this is the one of the two palaces. In fact, this is the building that you could see in the first picture, the opening of the presentation, if you remember that. So this is an air picture of the building after our own excavations there about 10, 15 years ago. And the question was very simple. I had my doubts from the very beginning for many reasons that regarding the chronology of this palace, which Yadin dated to the 10th century BC, and I had my own doubts, and I felt that maybe placing it in the 9th century would be more fitting from different perspectives. But there was, a dispute about it, and finally, after several years of discussions, the dispute has been resolved thanks to the deployment of radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon, carbon-14 isotope dating. I'm not going to go into the details of how this is being done and what's behind it, but let me just say that it provides us with the independent dating system, which is free of suppositions that come from understanding of the text. Because regarding the text, I mean, we all respect the text tremendously, of course, but we, just to remind you, we don't know when exactly it was put in writing and what was the ideology behind it and what were the recollections of the later authors when they described the periods before them. So as you can see here in this chart, the layer belonging or the assemblage of finds that come from this building is now radiocarbon dated to the first half of the 9th century, to the 9th century basically. So we are on solid grounds to say categorically that this building could not have been built in the 10th century by King Solomon. This is the bad news, but the good news is that it illuminates in a very interesting way the greatness of the northern kings of the northern kingdom of Israel in the beginning of the 9th century. This prosperity of while as you probably know, Solomon is not mentioned by any extra biblical source, maybe also because Assyria was still far away, but the northern kingdom is mentioned in several texts, and they are all complaining about the northern kingdom. And what do I mean by complaining? They are complaining because of the strength of the northern kingdom in the time of the Omri Dynasty. So for instance, on the left-hand side, you can see the very well-known inscription of Mesha, king of Moab, which can be now viewed in the Louvre in Paris. And King Mesha of Moab complains about Omrites that they took over parts of Moab before his time. On the right-hand side below, you can see an inscription found 20 years ago, 25 years ago, at the site of Dan in the northern part of Israel, written by the king of Damascus, Hazael, in the late 9th century, also complaining about the military strength of the northern kingdom in the first half of the 9th century. And in the middle is the very well-known monument inscription written by Shalmaneser III, the great king of Assyria, describing the Battle of Karkar in 853 BC. And he describes the coalition that came to Karkar to fight him, and the number one king in the coalition with the greatest number of chariots, for instance. The chariots can be considered as the tank brigades of antiquity. And the most impressive number of chariots is given by Shalmaneser to have come from the northern kingdom. He says, Ahab the Israelite, he calls him. So here we have backing of archaeology by extra biblical text. The second monument, which was considered to be dating to the time of King Solomon, is the Megiddo Gate. It's a long story. Let me try to phrase it in one sentence. The Book of Kings speaks about Solomon constructing, I mentioned it already before, Hatzor and Megiddo and Gezer, and all three sites were excavated, and in all three sites, similar gates were found. So in the beginning, for, again, Yigael Yadin, who was an extremely talented investigator, scholar, a fantastic scholar. I mean, the fact that today we do not follow exactly all his views does not diminish the really brilliance of his scholarship. So according to Yadin, and this is what I studied at the university when I came to start to study archaeology many years ago, the three gates at the three sites became the symbol of Solomonic architecture, and also the peg, so to speak, for dating monuments to the time of Solomon. These two, here are the pictures of two pictures of the Megiddo Gate. It was exposed by the University of Chicago in the 30s. Here, the palace was excavated in the 20s. This was excavated in the 30s. Let me just tell you that one wing of this wing over here of the gate had been removed by the University of Chicago team at the time in order to continue digging down. And just recently, I don't know whether Julia saw it already at Megiddo, just recently the National Parks Authority reconstructed the missing part of the gate. So now the gate stands, you know, in all its glory. It's a beautiful monument. So this is the monument that I'm speaking about. And in the season of 2018, so I'm almost bringing you breaking news, you know, COVID-19 breaking news, because we were supposed to work at Megiddo in 2020, but we could not, of course. And I frankly do not see us excavating in the coming summer. I don't think so. We will see. So I'm gearing up to trying to get organized for 2022. We will see. But in any event, in 2018, we worked at the gate, and this was in preparation for the reconstruction of the missing part of the gate. Here you can see still the gate, only one wing can be seen. And the results were fascinating. We discovered an unknown gate under the whole system of gates over here. I'm not going to, tire you with all the details of the stratigraphy and chronology of Megiddo. Just let me say that this is the major result that we can see I'm giving you here in 4 different colors, 4 different gates, one on top of the other. This is, by the way, the beauty of the site. There's no site like this where you can see series of monuments of the same type, one on top of the other, temples, palaces, fortifications, gates, as in this picture. And in green, you can see, a gate from around 1000 BC. This is the gate of the city that I mentioned before, the one which I called New Canaan. And then we can see this floor of the gate that I'm now referring to. And then there are 2 more floors, one here in red and one here in purple. And to make a long story short, here too, the results show us that the gate does not date to the 10th century, also does not date to the 8th century, as I proposed before. So I too was wrong about the chronology of the gate. The gate was constructed in the 9th century and continued to be used after several changes, indeed in the beginning of the 8th century. But the construction of this gate over here in blue is in the 9th century. What I'm saying is, this again shows you that the shows you the first big prosperity of Israelite Megiddo under the Omri Dynasty, a dynasty which established some sort of a mini empire in the land of Israel in the beginning, the first half of the 9th century, reaching, far away in the north, apparently menacing Damascus in the north, and also engaged in monumental construction at Samaria. Samaria, the capital, was built by them, and also in some of the important countryside administrative centers such as Megiddo. There are interesting changes that can be traced at Megiddo and shed light on the nature of this dynasty. For instance, until the rise of this dynasty, in the beginning, the Northern Kingdom emerged before this dynasty. There were like something like 50 years of rulership of other kings, other monarchs mentioned in the Book of Kings before the Omri Dynasty. And at that time, the cult of Megiddo was still as before in the Bronze Age, which means there was one big temple which served the town of Megiddo, the city of Megiddo. And we saw the temple for the period of the Bronze Age and later. And this one over here, this picture from our own excavations, this one was the temple for the beginning, for the first 50 years, half a century of the Northern Kingdom. And here are some of the cult objects that were found, including the figurines, this one and others, that were found in connection to this building. Now, what's interesting is that apparently this was still a period when the population continued to practice some behaviors, I would say, that continued from the period before. But when the Omrites came, when there is a temple at a countryside town like this, and the temple is central, and the temple is important, the temple is the center of power, because the temple controls agriculture, the temple controls redistribution, and so on. And this is not good for a dynasty like the Omrites. They were very, they were a central power. They wanted to decide and rule over the countryside. So indeed, what we see is something very interesting. I'm jumping over this because I see that my time is running up a little bit. In any way, what we see is that in the time of the Omri Dynasty, there is a big change. And instead of a central temple, the cult is now organized in the administrative building of the dynasty, constructed by the dynasty, which means that the cult is controlled and supervised by the king, not by the local authorities. And this is a big change that we can see, and this is a very good clue, a very good hint at the development of central authority, strong central authority in the Northern Kingdom in the first half of the 9th century BC, which means around 2,900 years ago, under the Omri Dynasty. One more thing that I, after all, wish to tell you before I continue. There is still one big riddle that we need to resolve. I don't know the answer, but I'm presenting the riddle to you. And that is that although we have all indications that the kingdom was well administered by the central authority in the capital Samaria, there is almost no evidence for writing. I mean, the very poor share that you can see here, piece of pottery on the left-hand side with 2 letters in ink, is in fact almost the only written evidence from the Northern Kingdom in the time of the Omri Dynasty all over, including the capital Samaria. This is still a big riddle. There are several ways to resolve it. Some people argue that they used to write mainly on papyrus, and papyrus, of course, did not survive. I'm not sure that this is a good answer, but let's leave it just there as a question mark for the beginning of the 9th century. Finally, I wish to say a few words about the early 8th century, the period between 800 and 750 BC. You may remember that I noted before that there were two important, powerful dynasties in the north. One, the Omrites, and I described to you the finds of Megiddo in the last 10 minutes or so. And the second strong dynasty is called the Nimshites, because of the family of the first king. Jehu was a Nimshite, and therefore he was Jehu, son of Nimshi. So the Nimshite dynasty. Now, in the beginning, the Nimshite dynasty was not only not strong enough, it was very weak, because the collapse of the Omri dynasty was brought about by pressure of Damascus on the Aram Damascus, on the kingdom of Israel. And for 40 years, between around 840 BC and 800 BC, the Damascenes and their king Hazael managed to rule over much of the territory of the land of Israel. But later, because of changing geopolitical scene in the region, Damascus was weakened, and Israel came to power again. And there were two strong kings, Joash and his son Jeroboam II. I wish to speak a little bit about this Jeroboam II, because in my opinion, this guy, Jeroboam II, this king, he was probably, in my opinion, the strongest of all biblical Hebrew kings, Judah and Israel combined. Long story for a series of lectures that you will attend perhaps in the future, who knows. Jeroboam II, remember the name, he ruled for over 40 years in the northern kingdom in the first half of the 8th century, and he was the strongest of them all, in my opinion, with all due respect, and I'm sorry, stronger than David, stronger than Solomon. He was the big guy. He was the strongest of them all. Do you want to see him? I have a picture. I have a picture of this guy, believe it or not.
I want to see it.
Here is Jeroboam II. And why am I saying this? This is a plaster decoration that was plaster painting that was found in a site in the northeast of the Sinai Peninsula. And this site is connected, according to material culture and inscriptions, to the northern kingdom. So first of all, this gives you a notion of how strong this monarch was, that he managed to reach and control one of the Arabian trade routes that came from Arabia to the Mediterranean via the Sinai Peninsula. And there we see a picture, this scene painted on plaster of a royal figure sitting on a throne. And the radiocarbon dates from this site are for the first half of the 8th century, which means to the time of Jeroboam II. So maybe we see Jeroboam II here. So I brought a picture to you to have a look at him. This is our big king. Remember him. So in his time, we see some major monuments. Let me try to wrap it up in 10 minutes or so, which is already too long, but please give me 10 minutes. In his time, from his time, we have some very important monuments at Megiddo. The first one, the famous Megiddo stables. Now, I'm saying now Megiddo stables. This is a picture taken by the University of Chicago in the 1920s. But after the 1920s, there was a big debate regarding these buildings. First of all, regarding function, whether they were indeed stables or storehouses or barracks or marketplaces. And secondly, regarding date, whether they date to the 9th century or to the 8th century BC. And we excavated a complex of these buildings. Not all of them had been exposed by the University of Chicago, so we had our own chance. And in modern techniques, we managed to first of all, well date them to the first half of the 8th century, which means to the time of this King Jeroboam II. And also, I think, to show that they indeed they were used as stables, that they were constructed as stables. And they demonstrate one of the most important economic sources for the northern kingdom in the time of this Jeroboam II, trade of horses. Israel was then the go-between between the Assyrian Empire in the north and Egypt in the south, and the Assyrian Empire needed horses from the south. There were also horses in the north, but this was the period of chariotry, of chariot warfare. And the northern horses were too small for the chariots. So they needed the big horses from Egypt. And Israel was the go-between, trading Egypt and also bringing them, breeding them, and then training them. So Megiddo, one of the best real estate properties of the northern kingdom, became one major center of what I would call horse industry in the beginning of the 8th century. Secondly, we managed to show that the situation that I pointed to before of cult supervised completely by the central authority, already as early as the 9th century, the Omri Dynasty, this continued also in the period of the Nimshites in the first half of the 8th century, which means again we have here indication for the power of the central authority over the countryside towns. So this one over here, in one place there is the major administrative building. Before I showed you the administrative building of the dynasty was here in the 9th century, in the northern part of the site. Now they moved it to the eastern part over here. There's a very beautiful building that the University of Chicago was the first to excavate, and we too a few years ago what there was left of this building, and we can see an administrative building with one room which was devoted to cult. So again, we have a situation. It's not exactly centralization of cult, but it is a different perspective of cult with the need to control religious activity at a town like this. Maybe this is good to. It will be good to finalize with this picture, with this screen, to say a few words about the diet front. Sometimes you work in archaeology and you hit things which you don't expect. There has been a discussion for many years regarding the taboo on consumption of pork in ancient Israel and in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy. Where does it come from, this taboo on consumption of pork? And there were several different ideas 25, 30 years ago. I remember myself also engaged in this discussion with some of us suggesting that the taboo on pork came from Judah and came from the confrontation between Judah and the neighboring Philistines, who were taken by the Judahites as typical pig raisers. So it was a matter of we and they. They raise pigs and they eat pork, so we don't. We refrain. And for many years, this was the idea. You know that in modern archaeology, we collect very carefully also bones from all the layers, and we study the bones, and archaeozoologists can identify, first of all, the species, and then can give us more information about the age of slaughter and this and that. We know a lot about the economy from the perspective of archaeozoology, of the zoological finds, of the bones found in the excavations. And what we see here is fascinating, because we noticed that in the 8th century, for instance, there are no almost pig bones in sites in Judah, whereas there is quite a remarkable number of pig bones in sites in Israel, which you see in the north. And we theorize now that the taboo on pork consumption comes first and foremost from the inner dispute between Judahites and Israelites in the 8th century BC. This is something that we proposed a while ago in a scholarly article, and this is what I think can be said today. Here on the left-hand side, you can see how we pick up very carefully the bones when we excavate, when we are in the field. So in this very beautiful site, beautiful city of Megiddo of the beginning of the 8th century came to a sudden end because of a change of politics, change of geopolitical situation. We know very well also today that a change of geopolitical situation can really bring about prosperity in certain moments and calamities in other moments. So in the case of the Northern Kingdom, there was a change. The Assyrian Empire, which was a strong empire, but ruling from afar, became some sort of a devouring empire, expanding empire. And after 10 years after the rule of Jeroboam II, they managed to take over the Galilee, including Megiddo, and later, 10 years later, also the capital Samaria, and that was the end of the Northern Kingdom, but it was not the end of the impact of the Northern Kingdom on all of us until today. Why am I saying this? Because we read today the Bible, and we think that the Bible is a composition of Jerusalem, of Judah, and this is true, of course. However, in the Hebrew Bible, as we look at it today, there is a big number of texts that can be proven to have originated from the north. For just to give you two examples, well known, I think, the early layer in the Jacob cycle in the book of Genesis. Or to give you another example, the heroic tales in the first half of the book of Judges. The geography there is very telling. We are definitely dealing with the Northern Kingdom. So although the kingdom was no more after 720 BC, the impact of the Northern Kingdom as a place possibly where the earliest biblical compositions took place, this impact is still with us until today. And on this background of this picture of the Assyrian palace, Megiddo did not decline after the takeover. It became the capital of an Assyrian province of Megiddo, and two beautiful palaces were built on the over the ruins of the buildings of the Northern Kingdom. So here is one of the Assyrian palaces that we excavated many years ago at Megiddo. And on this background, I'm thanking you very much for giving me your time and attention. Thanks a lot.
Professor Finkelstein, I would like to thank you so very much on behalf of myself and behalf of all of us. It was fascinating, as it is always when you speak. So thank you very much. And before we turn to the questions, we have quite a few of those. I would like just to say that you were talking about the Northern Kingdom of Israel from Megiddo. And next week, we will have a virtual tour of Samaria, of Sebastia. So we will be, it's just a coincidence, but next week we will be visiting one of the capitals of the Northern Kingdom, which you just mentioned. And we will be talking about Sebastia, and we will be talking about the Samaritans. So this is just a little promotion for next week. But that's going to be next week. And right now, let's turn to the questions. All right. So let me start from the beginning. Okay. So the first question was the mountain, where we're talking about Tel Megiddo, was the mountain top sliced off?
It was, in a way it was, because what we, when we look at Megiddo today, there are about 2 meters or so, which are already missing. And the reason is the excavations of the German expedition and later University of Chicago. This is really interesting. University of Chicago came to Megiddo with big money of David Rockefeller. And they thought that with this kind of support, they will manage to really peel off the site, one layer after the other. So I have some sort of an imagination in my head that at the end of this process, there will be one big pit in the center and no more Tel Megiddo. Thanks God that they did not manage to do this. After several years of excavations, the Tel of Megiddo proved to be more powerful than the University of Chicago excavators. And of course, they left us a fantastic record of archaeology, so we cannot complain. They made really Megiddo the centerpiece of a discussion of the archaeology of the Bronze and Iron Age in the entire region of the Levant. But they managed in the first few years of their excavations to really peel off some of the top layers of the site. So I suppose about 1.5 meters, or if not 2 meters, is already gone, not there. So in a sense, yes, the top of the site was chopped off by the excavators in the 20s and 30s.
Okay. Before we turn to the next question, since we start losing people, as it always, after an hour, people just get tired. So before we lose more of you guys, as I said, next week we have a virtual tour of Samaria. You are very much welcome to this one. This Thursday we will be touring Jerusalem. We will try to do it again, the Jewish quarter of the old city. And next week's presentation, next Tuesday, a week from today, will be amazing. Totally different from what we hear now. Our speaker will be Yola Reitman, a former Mossad agent, and she will tell us the incredible story of the Red Sea Divers Club, which is the story of rescuing the Ethiopian Jews from Sudan. If it wouldn't be true, it should have been a Hollywood movie. So there is a movie about it. There are actually 2 movies. One is Hollywood and the other one is a British documentary. So you're very much welcome to look at the chat, more or less in the beginning of the chat. There is a link to that movie on YouTube. So you're welcome to watch it. And you're even more welcome to join us next week to listen to Yola, because she's one of the ladies who was an actual Mossad agent there, and she will be telling us her personal story. Professor Finkelstein, I would like to invite you as well to join us next week. And okay, I will send you the link. And back to questions. Okay, so next question was, what is the infamous connection to Armageddon?
Yes, this is really important, but it is connected to in my opinion, to the kingdom of Judah more than the kingdom of Israel. There's a big question, why Armageddon? Armageddon is a corruption in Greek of the Hebrew Har Megiddo. Har Megiddo is the Mount of Megiddo. So Har Megiddo in Hebrew became Armageddon in Greek, and this is what we know until today as the site of the final battle between the forces of God and the forces of evil. So the entire eschatology tradition in the West, Judeo-Christian, is based on this idea of the final battle at Armageddon, and then what will happen in Jerusalem, of course, and the entire concept of messianism as well, because as a result of this final battle, a Davidic king will re-emerge to redeem us all, as you probably know. So what is the root of this idea? There are several possibilities here. The first possibility, which may be true, is that there was this memory in the land of Israel of this place, Megiddo, which saw several important battles in antiquity, battles which decided the fate of the entire region, the entire country, the people who live in this region, and therefore it became a symbol for decisive battles that can really affect humanity or the world of antiquity, at least the old world. There is a better explanation, or at least one more component that needs to be added here, and this is the following. After the Northern Kingdom was no more, about a century later, a king came to power in Jerusalem. His name of king was King Josiah, a king who is not very well known, to all of us, but is very strongly depicted in the Book of Kings. He is described, Josiah, who came to power around 640 BC. He is described as the most pious, the most righteous of the entire Davidic dynasty. He is described as the new David, in fact. And he is the only one, including David, the only one, Josiah, who is described as a king who walked in the path of the God of Israel, without turning to the left and without turning to the right. And the biblical text is even comparing him. There is a nuance there, comparing him to Moses, which is really incredible. Now, this King Josiah came to power during his time. He came to power as a young boy. And a few years later, the Assyrians pulled out of the land of Israel for reasons which had nothing to do with the land of Israel, for troubles in the north. And he had the sense that the moment has come to expand to the north and fulfill the ideology of the Davidic dynasty of ruling over the entire people of Israel, north and south, from Dan to Beersheba, ruling from Jerusalem by a Davidite. But he had this impression that after the Assyrians pulled out, there was a void, but there is never a void, as you probably know. And the 26th dynasty of Egypt came to the scene to inherit the territories left by the Assyrians. And the Pharaoh Necho of Egypt was on the way in 609 BC, something which is mentioned in the Bible, was on his way to the north to help the Assyrians against the Babylonians. He called on Josiah to appear before him at Megiddo. Something went wrong, and Josiah was executed by Necho at Megiddo. And with the execution of Josiah, the entire body of hopes of his party, let's put it this way, in Jerusalem collapsed. And 25 years later, Judah was destroyed by the Babylonians. So I think that the idea is something like that, that there will be a battle at the end of times between the forces of God and the forces of evil. And this battle will take place exactly there where the last righteous Davidite died. And as a result of this battle, a new righteous Davidite, Davidic king, will emerge. So I think that this is the idea of Megiddo. It can be felt already in the Bible. For instance, there is a hint to this kind of thinking before the New Testament, in the book of Zechariah, for instance, and then it can be traced in 2nd century BC Apocrypha, extra biblical texts of the 2nd century of the Hasmonean period, and from there it found its way into the book of Revelations later, which is a bit later than the Hasmonean period.
Okay, thank you. I would like to add that there is also another suggestion, which is that Armageddon is not a real place. It's only a myth. It's only an idea, and it's not actually, it has nothing to do with the how Megiddo, and that suggestion is based among other things upon the fact that by the time the book of Revelation was written, nobody remembered the name Megiddo. That name was lost and it was renamed into something else. And so there's no reason why the author of the book of Revelation would even know where Megiddo or Armageddon is. So maybe it's a divine idea rather than a physical location. But anyhow, so next question is, wasn't the stela discovered with the word House of David?
Yes, there were, I showed you if you remember, there was a screen with 3 monuments from the Omri period, and there was this stele, part of a stele, which was found at the site of Dan in the north about 25 years ago. It was written by apparently Hazael, king of Damascus, in the last 40 years of the 9th century. So the stele itself is maybe from 820, 830 BC, and it refers to the kingdom of Judah under the title, the House of David. And this is very important because it shows you that the memory of David was vivid, which means it makes David definitely historical in my view. I think that for me, David was historical even without this inscription for other reasons. But this makes definitely David an historical figure because the king of Damascus uses the genre of his time of calling a kingdom after the founder of the ruling dynasty or the important dynasty or the founder of the capital. So they speak there of the king of the house of David, the king of the house of David, which means the king of Judah. I can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. How many people could have lived in Megiddo, and are there any Jewish religious artifacts found?
Well, the number of people at Megiddo can be described, I suppose, at something like a little bit over 1,000. It was an administrative center. Most of the people lived in villages in the countryside around it. Regarding Jewish artifacts, let me remind you that we cannot speak about Jews yet at that time. I make a very clear distinction between Judahites and Jews. The people of Judah are Judahites because I think the very word Yehudi, Jew, comes from the province of Yehud, which was the province of ex-Judah after the destruction of the temple, the province of the Persian Empire. And I think that Judaism, as we know it, is basically a product of this period, including monotheism, real monotheism, a product of this period, and more so even a little bit later until the time of the Hasmoneans. So I make this distinction, and by that there is no layer that can be described as Jewish at Megiddo.
Is there equine bioarchaeology evidence of horses, like remains, bones, brains, etc.?
Unfortunately not. We made huge efforts to there is a possibility today to trace to have evidence for animals from sediments. I myself carried out a project in the Negev a few years ago. I excavated with a colleague from the University of Haifa, Ruth Shachar Gross. I excavated several ironite sites, and we there had evidence for the presence of goats, sheep and goats, and this and that, herds, I mean, pastoralism and so on. At Megiddo, and there was also a successful attempt by a German team to locate remains that come from horses in sediments in a site which is now in Iran, Bastam. site of the kingdom of Urartu, the ancient kingdom of Urartu, and now it is located in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We tried to do our best to do the same at Megiddo, and we failed. And the reason that we failed is that in scientific work like this, you always need to be minded to have control sediments, control samples, and the control samples must be different from the samples that you take from a given location. And here we failed. And the reason that we failed is that probably dirt was moved at Megiddo because of preparation of bricks, for instance, because of preparation of fields, because people used to move earth here and there. So we did not manage, we saw remains that were promising, but we did not manage to make a distinction between the samples and the controls.
Okay, I see. Well, there is a question, I'm not sure what was meant, but the question is, would you repeat the connection between the Jacob story and the Northern Kingdom?
Yes, well, the Jacob story as we read it today, but I fell into the trap that I myself laid. So this is my own trap. Let me try to explain this in several sentences. Today we read about the Triad Patriarchs. When I speak about the Triad, I refer to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is already the result of an author taking traditions and putting them together, because there is evidence that comes from biblical exegesis that leave just a minute Isaac aside, that the Abraham and the Jacob stories were separated in the beginning, and that the original Abraham tradition comes from the south. It comes from the area of Hebron, and I think it's relatively easy to show when one looks at that text very carefully, and that the original Jacob cycle comes from the area of the Jabbok River in Transjordan, because all the geography is there in the early layer, which means that Jacob was the eponymic hero of the north, of the northern kingdom, according to one version at least of the northern kingdom, and Abraham was the eponymic hero of the south. And then later, an author, probably from Judah, put them together in such a way that shows the domination of Abraham as the father of the nation over Isaac and Jacob, and thereby the domination of Judah over Israel. But this was done after Israel was no more.
All right. During the Israelite period, did people also live outside the walls?
Yeah, sure, outside the walls of Megiddo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Absolutely. We carried out in the 90s several major surveys in order to map the countryside of Megiddo. So we can produce a map for each and every period represented at Megiddo for this or that period of time. So for the Iron Age, for let's say the Iron 2A, which is the 9th century, or the Iron 2B, this is how we call these periods, which is the 8th century. Yes, certainly I can produce a map. And the Israelites, the people used to live in the countryside. In fact, I suppose that most people lived in the villages in the countryside, and a place like Megiddo was mainly an administrative center.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Wait a minute. I'm sure there was a, I just saw it, and yeah. Wasn't Paleo-Hebrew in use prior to the 5th century BCE?
You mean the script, I suppose?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, the script. Well, yeah. This is a topic that I'm working on. I've been working on in recent years with my friend Benjamin Zas from Tel Aviv University, who is really an expert on paleography. And we introduced a big change, I hope, into the discussion of understanding the history of writing in our region, because we preached in a sense, to base the discussion only on those inscriptions which come from good contexts, archaeologically speaking, well dated and so on. So if we do that, I think that the appearance of Hebrew, of what can be described as Hebrew script, is sometime in the very late 9th century, around 800 BC. I don't really think that, I mean, not only Hebrew, the appearance, the distinction between the different scripts, then how to call them, the territorial or the national scripts, this distinction can be felt only in the second half of the 9th century, not before, and even supposedly even a little bit later, perhaps. And before that, we can, if we speak about script, we think that we should speak about what we call supra-regional script, which comes before the development of the regional ones.
So, well, Professor Finkelstein, in such a case, I have to ask a question. So, if I, okay, sorry, a short one. So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying that what we normally consider Paleo-Hebrew inscription, for instance, the Gezer inscription, the inscriptions found in Khirbet Kayafa, etc., you don't consider them pre-Hebrew letters?
No, because if you take Kayafa, for example, or for that matter also inscriptions, some of them a bit later than Kayafa from Tel Esafik Gat, and also at the same time from Tel Rehov, not so far from Megiddo. Some of them at Kayafa, for instance, are Proto-Canaanite, and some of them are, we basically, Benjamin Zass and me, see three phases. We see a Proto-Canaanite phase. We see then a phase which we described as this supra-regional cursive. And then we speak about the regional variants, including Phoenician and Hebrew and so on. And all these places that I mentioned now, which means Kayafa and Tel Esafik Gat and Rehov, they still belong to the either Proto-Canaanite or supra-regional. And the first Hebrew inscriptions, as far as I can judge today, I'm speaking about the script, yes, not the language, of course. As far as I can judge today, the first Hebrew inscriptions are the Samaria Ostraka. And they are from the time of Jeroboam II, I suppose. So maybe a little bit before, who knows, but somewhere there.
Okay, so you do agree that Kayafa's inscription is Hebrew language, but not Hebrew script?
I don't think so. I think about the language there is a big dispute, and there are different ideas. I think most scholars today would not consider it. We don't really, depends how you read the inscription, and we don't really know. I don't think that we can describe it as Hebrew.
Okay. All right. So we will drop. We will drop the subject because I'm afraid that most of the audience doesn't really know what we're talking about. But now I really feel that we must invite Professor Garfinkel to speak about Kayafa's inscription. So just to be fair. Okay. Anyhow, and Professor Amichai Mazar. Okay, back to the question, Professor Finkelstein, and then we will invite you as well, and we will have a live debate. Okay. So, next question is why
Julia, I will have to part soon, so maybe we collect one or two more questions.
All right, 2 more questions, short answers, we done. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I will pick the questions. One question is asked by former volunteers, which were digging under your commandment years ago.
Yes, I identified the signs. I wanted to tell you that I noticed them and I remember them, and I did identify the signs sitting there.
Okay, that's great. I'm sure they're pleased. And so we have a question by Barry and Carol. Was Ahab considered a bad king because of civil control of religion and permission for idol worship?
Yes, I mean, in the eyes. So first of all, I want to invite the Steins to join us again. I mean, it's,
they would love to, but you don't expect.
It's never too late. I mean, okay, come on, guys. We are looking forward to seeing you again there. Anyway, yes, Ahab was described as a bad king in the eyes of the author of the Book of Kings, who comes from Judah, from the circles of King Josiah, which means from the Deuteronomistic camp in the kingdom of Judah. So for him, first of all northern kings were bad. So the southern kings, some of them are bad and some of them are good. But the northern kings are all bad, are all illegitimate, and some of them are worse than the others. And I have my suspicion that some of them are judged to be really in a very negative way because of their prosperity, because of the memories of their prosperity, which was brought to Judah by Israelite refugees after 720. And so this was a reason to paint them, to blacken them even more than the other kings. But of course, you know, I remember a moment that I gave a lecture somewhere in Israel, and I said, you know, things which sounded, you know, positive about Ahab, and the audience started, you know, yelling and shouting at me, how can you describe Ahab as a good guy? He was terrible, and so on and so forth. And I told him, listen, first of all, good and bad is that the truth is in the eye of the beholder. When I read the book of Samuel, I can tell you one thing: I would not marry my daughters to King David. This is for sure. You know, he's not my cup of tea as the husband of my daughters, you see. So good and bad is something that, you know, is in the eye of the beholder. And secondly, I said to this guy, you know, I cannot judge things from the point of view of the Deuteronomistic author. I can judge things, archaeology. Look, the Bible is about theology. Archaeology is about what? It's about material culture. So it's about prosperity or decline or this and that, trade, I mean, you name it. Settlement patterns, prosperity of population, and so on. So I, as an archaeologist, I can understand, because I'm so much interested in the Bible, and I myself is like a more than half-cooked biblical scholar, so I can identify maybe with the Deuteronomist, but when I come to look at things from the point of view of history, I need to turn to material culture, to archaeology.
Israel, I'm asking a short question. You're giving us a very long answer, which means that we must invite you again. Yes. But that will be next time, hopefully. Okay, last question. Okay, can you talk about the seal of Shema Eved Yerovam?
Yes, this is really fascinating. You know, the German excavator of Megiddo in the beginning of the 20th century found this seal, which is unique, and it says in Paleo Hebrew, in fact, like the Samaria Ostraka, it has the inscription Le Shema, which means belonging to Shema, servant of Jeroboam. Servant means high official. It's not servant the way we understand servant today. Servant is very high official of King Jeroboam. And this is, of course, Jeroboam II of the 8th century BC. Now, the story of this seal is fascinating because this seal disappeared. We don't know where it is today. There are all sorts of rumors about it, but we don't know. Fortunately, before it disappeared, Schumacher sealed it, and we have the negative of the seal. Because Schumacher apparently sent the seal as a gift to the Sultan. in Constantinople, in Istanbul, and it disappeared there. So nobody knows today where the seal is. Now, the seal is interesting and is, how to say, is verified in a way and verifying other finds, because now I have to turn to Judah. In Judah, seals appear later, not as early as the beginning of the 8th century. However, 2 seals were purchased in the late 19th century in the market of Jerusalem. Parenthesis, in the late 19th century, in my opinion, it was impossible to forge things like this because people did not have enough knowledge on the script, on the Hebrew script. I'm closing now the parenthesis. So the 2 seals that were purchased in the market in Jerusalem, they have inscriptions which mention Uzziah, servant of Uzziah, king of Judah. Now this Uzziah reigned in parallel to Jeroboam in the north. And there are good reasons to suggest that he was some sort of a vassal of this Jeroboam in the north. So in fact, the Shema seal from Megiddo and the 2 seals from the market in Jerusalem are the earliest seals in Hebrew and the earliest seals of Hebrew monarchs that exist, that we have.
Where is this seal now? The seal of the servant of Uzziah.
They are, both of them are in the Louvre.
Okay, which is closed because of the pandemic. I see.
I'm not sure that they are on display. I don't think that they are on display.
Well, we have to check it out. Professor Finkelstein, תודה רבה. It was a pleasure as always. Thank you so very much, and Laila Tov.
Thank you all very much for being with me, and I hope to see you in Israel in the not so far away future.
Yeah, don't give up on the excavations of next summer. We really hope to be there. We have volunteers here, so
we will see. We will see.
Okay.
Bye bye. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
Thank you
pleasure.
very much. Now we don't need Google anymore.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Yeah, we don't
Wow.
need
Okay, wasn't it amazing? Well, now we must have, listen, you don't even know what he said. You don't even know like what a crazy contradiction we have here. How many, ink was spent on things. Like he said things which are obvious to him and they're like totally impossible for others. I will really try to arrange another presentation with the other like leading scholars with an exact opposite opinions. Okay, it's not up to me to judge. I don't know who's right, but like he is amazing. He's totally